So most of the time in VPython, you're going to work with a single object, but on some projects, you may find yourself working with multiple visual objects on the display. And today I want to take a look at a couple of tools that can help you manage multiple objects. The first thing we're going to look at is how you can easily create multiple copies of an object. So for example, here I've got a green box set up. Its position is over to the left 1 unit, and it's got a specified size to make it taller in the Y direction than it is in the X or Z directions. And there's a lot to specify here. There's a lot that if I were to copy and paste and try to alter this that I could get wrong. So that's where the clone command is handy. Suppose I want to create a copy of this box. I can say box1.clone, and it will create an exact copy of this box using all the same parameters. Now, of course, if I run this code, I'm only going to see one box because they're going to be on top of each other. So I can make this thing different by specifying a different position. So let's move it over to the left. Let's move over to the left 1, 0, 0. And so what this line is going to do is create a second box that has all the same properties as box 1, except for the properties that I specify here. So when I hit Control 2 to run, we get our original box over here on the left, and we get its clone over here on the right. And again, it'll keep everything the same except for the items that I specify that need to be different. So for example, suppose I also wanted to change the color of the second box. I could change this to color.blue. And now it's going to keep the size the same, but change the position and the color. And there you have our cloned, slightly genetically altered, and physically relocated second box. And this also helps me keep track of this one being box 1 and this one being box 2. Now, suppose I wanted to take these two boxes and treat them as an ensemble. So say I wanted to move them both over to the right. We've seen in a previous video how we can animate these objects, how we can move them over in a specific direction. But I can also simplify that process by taking these two objects and placing them together into a compound. Let me show you how that works. Suppose I want to create a compound of these two. I can give it a name boxes, and then I just use the compound command. And compound takes a list of objects, so this can be any objects. They don't have to be the same type of shape. In this case, we're using two boxes, that one happens to be the clone of the other, but you can take any list of objects. So it takes this list and it groups these together, just like if you're working in PowerPoint and you want to group items together. It's going to group those two items together, and now I can treat those as one. Of course, there's not really any visual difference here. It just shows you're not losing any visual information. Let's set up our animation loop. So for example, let's say we want to move this thing over to the right. So let's set up a loop. Let's say for I in range, let's give it 100 steps. Let's set an animation rate of 10 frames per second. And we want to adjust the position. Now, I'm not going to adjust the position of box 1 and box 2. I'm only going to adjust the position of the compound boxes. So we'll take boxes.pause, and we'll do our typical update here where we take the position and add a little bit to it. Let's add a little bit in the X direction, 0.0100. And now this boxes.pause, this registers as the position of the center of the compound. So it takes kind of a geometric average of box 1 and box 2. And it's going to move the compound to the right. And you notice it's moving both pieces of the compound to the right. Notice they're moving at the same speed because they're now one conjoined object, or one compounded object, I guess would be the term. And in fact, if I were to try to update one of their positions, let's suppose I try to box1.pause plus, let's suppose I want this one to lag behind a little bit. I actually can't do that. Watch what happens here. 0.00500, Control 2. I actually can't do that. It's not going to respond to it. This thing does not respond to being called, actually, I guess this is box 2, isn't it? This thing does not respond to being called box 2 anymore. So, or box 1, sorry, what's this one? Box 1 is now a meaningless name. It no longer responds to being updated like this. So we should go ahead and delete that. So we saw in another video how we can rotate objects, and rotation and this compound object makes it even easier to rotate multiple items together. Let's suppose I wanted to set up a pinwheel. So let's say I make a cylinder going up, a cylinder going right, a cylinder going down, and a cylinder going to the left. So let's set up our first cylinder. Let's place it at the origin. So remember, cylinders, you specify the position of where it starts. And then you give the direction that it's pointing in. So let's have this one pointing to the right. And I can specify the color. And I need to give it a radius. Let's give it a pretty thin radius. There we go. Let me just double check, make sure this looks like the way I want it to. All right, there's my right pointing cylinder. I will move it down out of the way of these boxes in just a minute. And now, as we've just seen, I can take this cylinder and clone it and just change the pertinent information. So I can say c1.clone. Actually, I need to give this a name, don't I? c2 equals c1.clone. And so I want it to have the same starting point. I want it to have the same starting point. I want it to have the same color and same radius. I just want it to point in a different direction. So all I have to do is change axis. So let's change this one to point in the y direction. And then I can do the same thing here. Clone C1 again and make this one point in the negative x direction. And then one more time to get one pointing in the downward direction. And you see how much easier this is. There's so much less for me to have to keep track of because I don't have to worry about keeping the size consistent. I don't have to worry about keeping the radius consistent or the position. All I have to do is tell it recreate this object and change this one thing about it. And it should give me a nice little pinwheel. The pinwheel is not rotating. And in fact, I've given it the wrong Y position. I need this thing to be higher or lower to be out of the way of the two boxes. And actually, I'm not going to change the position up here. What I'm going to do is change the position of the compound. Because when I specify the compound, let's call this thing pinwheel, compound. When I specify the compound, I give the list of items I want. So C1, C2, C3, C4. And I can give it a new position. So I can tell it to move the whole thing down -2 units. So actually, it doesn't even matter what position I give these things at the beginning because I can use the compound function to set the position that I actually want it to have. And again, this is going to be the position of the center. And so now the center of it is going to be down at -2. So up here is 0, here's -1, and here's -2. So now we are safely out of the way of our moving boxes. And now we can set this thing up to rotate. And again, all I have to do is set up the compound to rotate. I'm not going to reference C1 through C4 because let's be honest, it would be kind of difficult to rotate these things about their end points. I'm not even sure how I would program that. So we'll say pinwheel.rotate. And we'll give an axis of the -z axis so that it rotates that would be clockwise, -1 there, excuse me. And we'll have an angle. Let's give it a little bit of an angle, 0.1. So now it's going to rotate the compound. It's going to rotate each of these as a compound about its center. And there you go. There you have your rotating pinwheel going about its center, going in a clockwise direction. So I think the compound is pretty neat. If you're looking to create more complicated structures, this is a handy way to keep track of all that and to easily manipulate it. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.